Can folks hear me okay? I plugged in my headphones. Yep, okay. So give me one sec. I'm gonna start sharing this shortly. Okay. Let me know if you guys can see me, or let me know if all of you can see what I'm sharing at the moment. I have my Google Slides up. Yep. Okay. So, oops. Okay, I don't know why it says loading for so long. Okay, yeah, looks like it's working good. So my talk is titled Seeing is Believing, Web Apps Before and After Remix. And the inspiration for this talk was mostly came out of a conversation that I was having with other developers, backend developers, also new front-end developers who didn't see kind of the magic that I saw that Remix brought to the table. So I plan in this talk to show you ways that Remix makes developing web apps a lot easier. And I centered it mostly towards people who are new to Remix, don't know much about Remix. I don't plan to go very deep into the internals of the APIs. Maybe we can talk about the API internals and stuff at the end, but that's mostly the intended audience. So to start off, Clifford Fajardo. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. So Hayward is in the East Bay. Been here all my life. And I work on the software-defined infrastructure team at LinkedIn. So it's an internal tools team. And as you can imagine, at a company large like LinkedIn, we have lots of systems. And part of what my team does is help visualize those systems. So we have lots of APIs and lots of data. Our team helps make other teams more productive by creating tools around visualizing and taking action on our infrastructure. I'm on Twitter. I tend to tweet about JavaScript and web development and programming in general. So that's my tag. And I love working on the web, and sometimes you might catch me on open source forums. I really like open source as well. So what is Remix? I feel like it's good to break that down while even going through the documentation myself. I found there's a lot of stuff that you could miss. So firstly, Remix is a full stack web framework. So you have the option to write your code in TypeScript or JavaScript. When you have a Remix application, it comes with some awesome tools out of the box that you don't have to configure. It just makes your life easier. For example, the ES build system, which it compiles your TypeScript code down to JavaScript. It does it in a fast way. So as your code base grows, Remix is there to help reduce the build time of your application, because this tool is written in Golang, the ES build. So the majority of people write Remix apps in React, and I imagine most of us use React today. However, in the future, you'd be able to use Vue.js, Svelte, and other popular frameworks with Remix. So where does it fit in your stack? So typically the way I've seen Remix used and ways that I would recommend using it is you could use it as your main server. Other people call it the front-end web server. Ultimately, this is the thing that returns to you back your HTML page. So you could use it in a traditional client server model like this, or what a lot of people also do is they have Remix very similarly to the left. They use it as the front end web server, but that front end web server is making calls to other APIs. And then the Remix server is kind of like a proxy server, your front end server that is transforming all of that data and then returning it in a nice way for your web application. And that's the way that we develop at LinkedIn, and I've seen the large companies typically develop like that too. Yeah, so I mentioned it comes with a lot of baked in tools, and this is important to call out because if you remember the days of setting up, if we go back a few years, 2016, 2018, and even 2020, setting up a React application can be a difficult task. There's a web bundler you have to set up, like Webpack. There is maintaining that bundler. There is a lot of manual things that you have to do to get a performant web application that's ready to use in production. So in addition to Remix coming with compiler, a bundler for static assets, Remix also on the server side acts as a HTTP handler. So later I'll kind of show you what that kind of means. It's a server framework because it has opinionated ways for you to structure your web server essentially, but it's similar if you've written or seen Rails, how it has a certain opinion so that you stay on the happy track. It has lots of those nice features, so you're not just given a blank canvas and then having to hunt npm for lots of different packages and things like that. On the browser framework side, Remix also has a lot of nice built-in utilities that you don't have to configure from scratch. Like if you've ever set up a Create React app or any other, maybe you've used Vite with React, there's still lots of configuration you need to do with those frameworks. And Remix's goal is to try to get you as ready to go as fast as possible to production. So I mentioned that part, compiler aspect of Remix. When I say HTTP handler, this is kind of just taking the magic away from Remix. So under the hood, by default, Remix is running an Express server. So you can see right here on the right side that when a web request comes in, Remix essentially normalizes the web request that's coming in and converting it to a web compatible response object. And you'll see why this normalization of server-side Node.js APIs and client-side web APIs is important later on. Cool things about Remix is you might have a Remix app one day written and hosted on Node.js, or using Node.js rather, but then later on, as the JavaScript engines improve, there's Bun, there's JavaScript Core from Apple, you might want to swap the server, or I'm sorry, the platform runtime, and it's very easy to do that with Remix. It's very compatible with lots of the common solutions that exist today. So out of the box, it has good conventions for structuring code. Remix acts as a view and controller for your app. We'll get to see a visual of that very soon. A route module, it contains both the UI and the interactions with the model. Model meaning the data that's coming back from your database. And you have it all in one file, which in my experience leads to great productivity and developer ergonomics. Is just very easy to work with this framework, and I haven't experienced anything like it since I started developing. Other cool things that Remix has is server-side rendering out of the box. Lots of people may not put too much attention to this, but implementing these things from scratch are very hard. I've worked on server-side rendered apps and platform teams, and just maintaining that code it's very hard. Companies like Airbnb, Netflix, LinkedIn, our server-side rendering solutions are very complicated. But with Remix, it just comes out of the box, and you almost forget that it exists. They're at the bottom, feature flag and A/B test, and so these are other things that are very easy to do with Remix because of server-side rendering. So you might work on an app or an infrastructure team developing internal tools, and you might put your features behind flags. Or let's say there's a production error. Maybe you don't want to SSH into a box. What you can do is just add a query param to a certain API endpoint, and once that request goes off, Remix can process that and then hide that page or component that's misbehaving. So there's lots of cool things that Remix facilitates that would be otherwise very difficult. On the last slide, I talked about how a route module contains the UI and the interactions with the models on the server. So I imagine lots of you have seen this image on the home page, and this is just a single file. We can imagine it's just the root index.html, but there's a lot of awesome stuff happening here. So this loader actually gets called on the server. The action also gets called on the server. And then on the bottom, you see something very familiar, just a component. And that gets server-side rendered, but also becomes interactive once it gets loaded into the browser. But the crazy thing is, it happens so seamlessly that there's no transition. And I think Remix just helps me focus on building the applications that I want with this simple model. And as you can see here, loader, we're calling get projects. You can imagine this returning an array of objects inside of my component. I'm calling use loader data, an array of objects, and then you can see me rendering it here. So we'll see examples that I'll run in the web browser very shortly as well. I want to call out the server-side rendering stuff again, because I've run into challenges with server-side rendering. At some point in LinkedIn's history, we had essentially two different versions of our app running. We would show web crawlers a server-side rendered version of, like, let's say a public profile, and then we'd also offer a different experience if you weren't a web crawler. And what I'm getting to is with frameworks that don't have this seamless integration with SSR, you might be maintaining almost two code bases, and you're duplicating code, duplicating complexity. So here on the screen, you see this slide with a speaker at the Remix conference, and he also shared his experience with server-side rendering. And I imagine it's the experience of lots of people who aren't using something like Remix, where this guy's team essentially had two versions of their app: the publicly facing web app, and then the authenticated version of the web app. Once you log into, I believe they had something like an e-commerce store. So they had a separate server that would render the publicly facing app, aka when you're logged out. And they had lots of code duplication. They had lots of technical complexity. They were using Puppeteer, which is a tool that helps you emulate browsers. So they were server-side rendering their pages with Puppeteer. And then they were storing those pages in S3, and they talk about how they then had to use Nginx, and it can get very complicated with SSR, but that's it's very easy with Remix, and you'll see very soon how that is. So when I say browser framework, the awesome stuff with Remix is that it comes with a routing solution built in. You're not setting that up from scratch. There's nice conventions to follow, so it's very easy for somebody to add a new page and get going. Other things that Remix handles once it gets loaded on the client side is it has features where it could revalidate your data for you. So for example, you might have a page where you have an order and you click, or rather, let's say you're starting, what's a good example? Let's just say you're a student using some web tool and you're marking your homework as completed. So you make an update, and then later you want to show the status of your assignment get updated in the UI. Typically, what you have to do is you make the API call, but then you would also want to refetch the updated state of that task you were doing. So there's two separate processes going on, but you'll see how with Remix, it's almost as if there's just one thing going on. So it significantly reduces your state management challenges. So when you're building Remix apps, in my experience, you're not using use effect or use state as often. And you're typically with Create, React app, or any single page application solution that's not using Remix, you're appending things to the URL, you're managing that URL state. With Remix, lots of those things come out of the box. You also, this was another thing that was like an eye-opener for me when somebody showed me and talked about how if you're using Remix, you may not need React Query, Redux, or SWR. And it's because Remix does a lot of those things, like I said, like revalidating data for you. Let's go to the next slide. So with browser framework, I just want to quickly go over what that means. I imagine lots of you on the call have seen the Remix website, but I wanted to highlight how you get lots of things for free with Remix that you would otherwise not get with a solution where you're just using a typical client-side rendered app, or you're not using Remix as your front-end server. So if we go to the Remix website, I'll just briefly skim over the part where Remix is doing lots of awesome stuff for us in the browser. So earlier in the call, I mentioned how Remix is a compiler as well. It's the server framework. Remix knows your URL paths. So you'll see later on how the way we structure our apps, Remix uses that to take advantage of doing things like data parallelization. So typically in apps, you might have nested paths like this where you have a sale and an invoice, and each of these have their own data requirements. So you might do a fetch here, you might do a fetch in another place nested inside the app. So, whoops. Yeah, so we typically might have lots of nested data requirements. But when you're using Remix, and because of the conventions you follow, there's lots of things you get out of the box that you don't have to think about. So as you can see, the loading state of an app without Remix and with Remix, The app on the left side is fetching the data as certain components are loading. So you might load the left's dashboard first, and then the sales page might have its own data. So then you fetch the data there, and then you're in the invoices route, and that has its own data. So then that fires off another request, and that causes this waterfall effect that you guys might be familiar with. But because Remix is a compiler, it knows how your routes are structured on the server. It's able to fetch everything and all the data requirements at once. So you get this nice, a faster experience and all the data loaded in parallel. So I'm just finishing up the Remix tour here. There's another part that I wanted to get to. So Remix, I don't know about y'all, but I really haven't used error boundaries in my React apps. But the way Remix does error boundaries and error handling, there's no reason you don't want to do those type of things anymore. So in these files where you're writing your HTML, your loader, or your JSX rather, you export a function called error boundary. And let's say inside of your nested component, you weren't able to get the data for some reason. You're able to have this nice way to granularly show error messages in a way that I haven't seen with current solutions. So I'm going to go back to the slides. Okay. Yeah, my computer is very hot right now, so it's taking long to load things. So let's get to the code examples. So I have two apps running. One is a Create React app, and the other one is a Remix app. So they're just running on two different ports. So I'm going to go to the Remix app first. So I have a few examples that I want to cover just to nail the point on some of these things that Remix offers. So the first one is a mutation example that really just shows the essence of how you write your apps with Remix, and you'll get to see the revalidation feature that I mentioned. And I also want to show you the code. So this is the Create React app. This is the Remix app. So if you haven't started a Remix app before, the way you create routes is just by adding a new file under the routes folder, and under the hood, that'll just spin up a new server-side endpoint for you. So as you can see here, this is just the index page I was showing with links. There's nothing special happening here. It looks like a typical React component. But then I want to go to the mutation test. I might need to quit an app that I have because it's causing my computer to run slow. I don't think I can do much about the lag right now. Okay. Trying to drag this out of view. So I'm going to go over the mutation test, and all this mutation test does is, firstly, it's rendering some data that I got from my database. So you can see here a loader. All a loader does is get data for you. It can be from a database. You can return an array of objects. You can see here, I'm saying database.get items, and let's return it to the client. And then inside of my actual component, Remix provides a hook called use loader data to be able to get that information that your loader returned. And one of the interesting things about this is that when you have your code, your server-side code and your client-side code together like this, Remix provide nice facilities to be able to get type safety from the front end to the back end very easily. So inside of my loader, you can see that, let's see, where is it? Yeah, okay, right here. On line 28, you can see that I'm calling use loader data to get my items from my database. And then I'm saying use loader data is of the return type of my loader. So when I hover over projects, you can see that I have type safety that's coming directly from the backend. And if I end up using the data that I'm getting from the backend incorrectly, you can see that I get that instant feedback. There's a bit of a lag on my computer, I'm sorry. But you get that type safety from front end and to back end. Okay, so the loader, all I did was return the array of objects. I'm using use loader data to get my data, and then I end up rendering those projects. So that's what you can see here. And when I type into this form, let's just add a new project. Make this bigger. And I'm gonna open my dev tools over here. Sorry. Okay, I ended up disconnecting my other monitor. I think it was hogging too much memory. So, I'm gonna type in an item. I'm gonna post it to my backend, and what you'll see is that I can move this. You'll see that it makes the post request right here, post, but then you also see that it does a get request. So that's something that you typically, after you make a put request with other solutions outside of the Remix world, you make an API call to get the current projects. But with Remix, you really get that almost out of the box. You can see that I did the post, and then Remix called to actually fetch that data for this particular route that I'm on. And then it re-rendered what was on the screen. So let's do that again. So we did a post, and then it did a get, and then it updated the UI. And where is that on in the code here for this particular route? So you can see here, an action, all it does is handle things like put, post, and delete. I get the data from the front end, I end up adding it to my database. So database.add items. And then I end up doing database.get items to get the freshest data. But I didn't need to call the action or anything in my UI code. You didn't see me use like use action or, hey, wait for that put request to finish, and then let's make a call to the database from the client side. That just happened automatically with Remix because of these special functions like loader and action, which can only exist in as far as I know right now in the routes folder. So if you've used React Query, this is you can get similar functionality with hooks to do this, but you just get this out of the box with Remix. And typically this is the experience that we all want anyway. We make a post request, we want to get the freshest data. Sure, we could use stale data, and but when it's so easy like this, why not just get it from the source of truth? The other example that I wanted to talk about is the SSR and what that looks like. Some people may not be as familiar with SSR. What that really means is when you request a web page, let's say I share this with you and you open it, the entire HTML for the page gets built on the server. So I'll just quickly go over this because I'm also noticing time is running a bit. So you see here that I get the document, but all of the markup for the document is already there. So if I do view page, or let's see, view page source, view source, view source, you can see all the HTML and markup when I requested this page was already built. So how is this different, or why this is even interesting? I'll get to that right now. So this is an SSR example using client-side rendering, and I just realized that should say client-side rendering. But when I request this page, you typically have seen in React apps where you have a root and then everything mounts on that root, and then the HTML gets created once the page loads on the browser. So if we do view source for this page, you see that when we first request a page from our web server, that this says div ID root and it's empty. So the React doesn't get created until all the JavaScript has loaded into the browser. And for applications like e-commerce, let's say you're a publicly facing web app and you want to get ranked on Google, you want to have your content that's publicly facing be server-side rendered, or it's more preferable because the web crawlers can parse that information much better, even though the web crawlers nowadays can parse JavaScript, but not all web crawlers are as efficient as Google's web crawlers to do that. So if you want to have a strong reach, no matter where people are coming from geographically, in my opinion, server-side rendering is the best. So that was the client-side rendered example. This is the server-side rendered example where you see, let's see, yeah, it's all minified, but it's here. All the HTML gets built when you arrive on the page. And just to show you how easy it is to like develop with Remix, I'm going to show you what the flow is like to create a new route and have some data showing. So I'm going to run npm run dev, that starts the server. And if I want to create a new endpoint, what do we call it? Meetup .tsx. It's as easy as that. That spins up a server-side handler for you. So it's ready to accept requests. And I'm just going to copy and paste some code. I'm just going to render some HTML. And you don't need a loader, but yeah, this one will just render HTML. So when I go back to the browser, go to Meetup. Whoops. Maybe I didn't start the, oh, whoops, messed up here. So I just created a new Meetup endpoint, and I'm just going to render HTML. Meetup. Oh, yeah, I forgot to change the content. So we have the Meetup endpoint. I didn't need to spin up a new API endpoint. I didn't need to restart my node server or anything like that. And then if I want to display some data like I showed before, you just bring in the loader. So I'm just going to return an array of objects from my loader. But you can imagine this coming from the database. Use loader data. Okay. Let's just call this items. And then here we can render those items. Got a typo. Item. This is the challenge of doing live demos. Why isn't, what am I forgetting?
There's one more parentheses missing in line 21, just one more. Yeah.
There we go. So just like that, we were able to get data from our database if I was actually making a database call. This is done in the loader. I just call use loader data, and then I'm able to immediately just iterate over the items that were in my database. So again, didn't have to set up a server-side handler. It just was that simple. You didn't need to like create a new React router route and think about all those small things. Is just literally add a file here and let's just render it, and boom, it's server-side rendered. If you transition between pages, it's client-side rendered. So you get the best of both worlds. One thing that's important, I think, to call out with Remix is why it really shines, or how it really shines, is that well, firstly, JavaScript has evolved a lot over the past few years. So lots of the APIs that you use in Node now exist, or rather, browser APIs and Node.js APIs, they now exist, well, both on the browser and on the server, well, whether you're using Node or just the browser. So you can use fetch, request, response, URL search param. So you could literally do things like copy code that's on your server. So if I had code, let's see what's an example here. I don't have it in this project, but you can imagine I'm calling new URL here, new URL. I'm getting the request. And what do I want? Request.url, I think, yeah. So you could copy this code from your server and then you could log it on the client too. So because you're using the same language, this is very easy to do things like that. You don't have to context switch. There's it's a very seamless experience, just copying APIs that you're using on the server, then using them on the client. I should have prepared better for that demo, but it literally happened last week when I was teaching another developer how to use Remix for an internal tool we're using. I think I've covered most of what I wanted. Where Remix shines, I believe it shines for public-facing web apps. It's also great for internally facing web apps. So whether you're logged in or you're logged out, Remix is great for both use cases, like I mentioned, because it offers a server-side rendering out of a box. It's just very easy. Internal facing web apps typically are single page applications, and lots of people I talked to at LinkedIn and a bunch of places, we wish we had server-side rendering for our internal tools that are written in other languages for the backends, but because of maintaining that complexity, we use lots of different languages, but because of the complexity of getting SSR to be so easy, we just never, it doesn't make sense for us to spend time doing SSR, whereas with Remix, it's just, you get it for free. So yeah, SSR apps and single page apps are great for Remix. Where it might not be the best is if you're purely using it as an API server. So for example, you have a microservices architecture and all you want your server to do is respond with JSON requests. That's not where Remix really shines, but you can use it for that. So it's quite flexible, but I'd recommend just using something else. Rendering static content only. So Remix can do this because of SSR. I love Next.js, and it's still a great option, but a lot of the static rendering that you get with Next, you can also emulate with Remix just using cache headers. So yeah, that is it. I apologize for the lag. Wasn't expecting that. It kind of messed up my flow, but if you guys have any questions about Remix in production and my experience with it, I'm open books. I also forgot to show, actually one last thing, I forgot to show this benchmark repo that I created, Remix benchmarks. This might be interesting for folks who want to make the case for Remix. So I created a benchmarking repo where I tested the performance of several variants of Remix. So Remix using Fastify, Remix using Express, just a regular Remix app. And I have the benchmarks in here showing how many requests per second each implementation has. At work, we actually benchmarked Remix against our Python servers, and Remix was about 60% faster. And of course, you have to caveat all benchmarks with, that it might run a bit differently on your machine, but it wasn't really a surprise when we got 60% improvement when we benchmarked Remix against our Python servers. So that was kind of what motivated our team to explore just moving to Remix, because we would get that performance benefit just because it's Node and it typically is faster than Python apps out of the box. So I can share this benchmarking repo later. Yeah, that is it.
Ooh,
Whew, that was a lot.
Ooh, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Clifford. Anybody have any questions for Clifford?
Looks like Nathan has a question, but I'm not sure if his hand.
Yeah, I'm trying the hand thing. How's it going? Yeah,
Hey.
thank you so much for sharing your experience with Remix so far. So I'm actively using Remix, but just sort of starting to build out a smaller application. So maybe one of the things I'm wondering are what are some of the pain points you've seen? Maybe especially if you've scaled up to bigger apps. Like an example pain point that comes to mind for me is thinking about authentication and needing to like put that in all your backend loaders today. And then I guess sort of a second follow-up is like, do you see these as short-term problems that have solutions or long-term issues with Remix?
Yeah, authentication is a bit tricky with Remix. There are, if you're hosting with popular providers, you might already find solutions in the Remix examples repo on GitHub. But the authentication that I've seen that works more easily than the straight out of the box Remix app server is when you use the like Remix Express template, or if you use like the Remix Fastify template, because the underlying server gets exposed to you, and you can write code as you normally would in the server.ts file that the Express and Fastify Remix template expose.
Yeah, so I just wondered if you had other things that come to mind as like, I have Auth, it's actually working fine for us. It's just that maybe it's not quite as, it's like something I think of like a middleware in other platforms, but instead I find myself having to weave more code in. That may just be a mistake in how I've done it. But anyway, do you have other things that come to mind for challenges as you've been building out larger Remix apps?
Yeah, there's other challenges. One quick note about the auth stuff. If you are using Remix Express or Fastify, you could implement the authentication as kind of like in what you described, the middleware pattern, because that server is exposed. So, but other challenges that I faced initially were not all component libraries implement, for example, the form HTML5 form API. So you might be writing some boilerplate or hidden inputs, things like that to overcome that, the fact that some component libraries don't expose certain properties on forms, input fields, and things like that. But really, besides those, the authentication being a bit tricky and some component libraries not being HTML5 form compatible out of the box, haven't ran into too many difficulties.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, in my experience so far, Remix really makes us better web developers. I find myself going to the MDN docs. Fortunately, we have form elements with semantic form nomenclature, and so far it's been smooth sailing.
Right. Yeah, that's another thing I really like with Remix. We have at work right now, we use a different language other than JavaScript for backend, and sometimes when you have time crunches, you're under pressure, you don't want to necessarily jump into the backend code and make tons of changes, because your dominant language, if you're working on the front end a lot, is JavaScript. So you tend to shove a lot of like data transformation logic and a bunch of other things like that to the front end. But with Remix, it's super easy to just put things on your server and keep your client-side code very simple.
Yep, I am literally doing that. I work for Tesla, and we're working on a proof of concept, and we do a lot of data transformations on one of our applications on page load, because we combine data from like 4 or 5 different teams. And we all do that on the UI side while we're setting up the Remix store. And like page load speed, even with Akamai caching is like 4 seconds. We were hoping to get it sub 2 seconds without edge functions, but once we are able to get an adapter written for Akamai, which there is none currently. So if anybody has worked with an Akamai serving platform, feel free to give me some articles, reach out to me. I'm hoping to maybe contribute to writing an adapter myself, because that could potentially get us to sub 1 second page load speed.
Oh, another thing on the challenges that I ran into was, or something I realized later was that when I was benchmarking Remix against another server, I was very surprised by the results I was getting. So Remix out of the box, it's a pro or con depending on your use cases. It does gzip compression for you, has that enabled. So that could actually be slowing down your web server a lot, because that's pretty CPU intensive. So this is mostly the case if you're using the Remix app server in production and you're not maybe using the Express or Fastify, which allow you to just comment out gzip compression.
Is that something Remix does, or is it part of like the ES build? I'm not really
Yeah, it's something that Remix does just out of the box for you. I think most people won't notice it unless they're probably benchmarking. And that's how I found out, because I was trying to understand why I was getting certain requests per seconds, as I was anticipating just more performance. And that was the case for me, that gzip was enabled, logging is enabled by default as well for the app servers. So, and it's using Morgan I think Morgan is what it's called, the Express logger. So if you're using Fastify template, it comes with Pinot. So you could swap the logger out, and I think you could get performance too. Yeah, but happy to talk anytime on the Discord, Twitter, about Remix learnings and stuff like that. So feel free to reach out.
I have one last question. I've tried playing around with Next, and what I found annoying was always having to use Next transpile modules to like transpile stuff down to CommonJS, because we have so many libraries that we use in open source, which do not necessarily have an ESM build. Was there anything similar in your experience with Remix? Or was it not even there? You were just like, wait, it just works.
For me, maybe it's because of the libraries that I use. We use we don't use too many libraries in our Remix app. It's an internal tool, but I hadn't run into those issues, unfortunately. I couldn't help you there right now.
Okay, that's fine. That just means that, okay, I'm gonna face the music when I hit that place.
Yeah, there's some documentation about that. So I think currently Remix is all CommonJS, and if you want to use ESM modules, you have to do some extra configuration. There's a CLI tool that makes that fairly easy. Let me share the documentation. But yeah, it's a hustle. Like, it's annoying. The error message is not really easy to read, right? Whenever you have an ESM and CommonJS error.
No, that's fine. I think it's better to go with CommonJS as default for now, because it's going to take a while for the industry to move. It's not going to be an easy path. So I like Remix approach that way.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I guess at Remix, at least you still have the issue the other way around, though.
Yeah, that's going to be a pain point maybe 2 years down the line.
Yeah, I'm curious, Ashwin, because you said you're prototyping Remix at Tesla. What do other people on your team think about it? Because like for me, when I saw it, because of all the pain points that I've experienced and challenges over the past 5 or 6 years developing on the web, when I saw all the stuff you don't have to do with Remix, it was just like wow, like I was able to see the light very quickly and all the benefits. But I've noticed other people who may have started or don't have lots of front end experience, they may not put they probably may not put too much attention towards Remix, and because it's hard to discern what the benefits are, because there's so many like buzz terms and frameworks nowadays, like Next, all great frameworks, but I'm just curious about your experience.
So we did have a reach out sync with Kent. As for sharing the proof of concept, maybe I might have to tone certain things down, and I might have to pass it by my manager just so that we abstract out some of the business parts of things. But I'm going to be part of this Remix Bay Area meetup group, and I'm going to be active. And so maybe in a couple of months, I'll be in a good shape to even present something over here. So it's just a delicate line that I need to, toe. That's pretty much it. And as for like Remix, I'm loving it. I'm trying to kind of push that internally within Tesla. There are a few takers of Next just because it's been around for a while, but I didn't like their obfuscation of like get server-side props, like so many custom things. This is very simple. Just have a loader, have an action, have a form. And a couple of PHP developers internally loved it because they like to reason the old school way. And that's why it's called Remix. It's just remixing old tech in a new, bottle. Old wine in new bottle, basically.
Yeah, I'll have more stories about my Remix experience. Actually, over the next few weeks, I'm implementing SSO and a bunch of things like that internally at LinkedIn, and trying to get it to work with Remix. It's already running in production, but now I have to do the security aspects and things like that. So yeah.
All right, then thanks, Clifford, for this. It was really useful. I had to drop in between for like 10 minutes just for like another meeting at work, but that I got back in as soon as I could. But I'm gonna watch the recording.
Awesome. And yeah, you're most welcome. Anybody here as well. I just put in the chat link to the sign up form for giving a talk. But everyone's most welcome to sign up to talk about how they're using Remix.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions? If not, we might maybe call it a early meeting. And
if I know we have said it was going to stop at 6:15, but I have a question, and I'm pretty newbie. It's just development in general, so forgive me if this was, one of those questions that you could just point me to an article for. But like, I started coding like last January, and this is something I've been like lurking in the Discord and couldn't find like a real solid answer on. But like migration, like migrating an existing code base as opposed to spinning up new ones with Remix, like what's like, I guess, your top of mind comments on it specifically versus like what kind of migration strategy? Like, are you able to do incremental, like where you kind of piecemeal stuff from, let's say, like in my case, I have a node backend with a create racktap front end. I'm sick of that create racktap thing. I want Remix. So like, I want to be able to like kind of piecemeal take certain routes and components and parts of it over. And people have commented on it in Discord, but I'm not quite sure like still what my strategy is. So I'm just curious if you've had to migrate anything existing over like that.
yeah, I'll talk about how we're currently prototyping and migrating on my team. So one of the complicated ways is like to spin up like Nginx and do these URL rewrites. That's something that we didn't do or anything like that. what we currently are doing is we have just a new server just running, and we're just transferring over the features from our main app over to this Remix server that lives in isolation. Because our app is fairly big, we're once we know it's like working functionally like the original app, that's when we'll feel comfortable just creating a new branch in our main source repo and basically just copy and pasting a lot of the code. I know that there's other ways of doing it. Like I said, there's like URL rerouting. There's a good talk actually by somebody who did a Next.js talk, Next.js comp. I think it's like migrating to Next.js. They talk about how you do URL rewrites, but you know, the two simple ways, in my opinion, to do it are just have another app on the side. You're migrating stuff incrementally. And then one thing that you could do in your existing code base is start using React Router 6.4 and above. So yeah, start using the actions, the loader APIs, and then even kind of modeling your directory structure, kind of like a Remix app. So kind of like how there's a routes folder, maybe your page components, you just start putting them in there so that you'll see more opportunities of how you can emulate the Remix structure, and it'll just make the transition easier, at least in my experience.
Sweet, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was kind of the initial go, was just going to do that. The thing they published on GitHub with the official kind of migration guide, where you upgrade your React router and then you just go from there. And it seems like that in itself is kind of like the biggest change, because after that you kind of like are put on a track such that you can kind of just tweak the components and stuff once React router is implemented. But thanks, that was super helpful.
Yep.
Very cool. Any other last questions? Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you all for joining. We actually have another Remix meetup in just 1 week. So back to back this month. And then we're still looking for a speaker in September. So if anyone wants to give a talk in September. But next Tuesday will be Sebastian giving a talk on high performance e-commerce sites with Remix. So definitely come back if you can next Tuesday. Thank you all. We'll post this this video on YouTube and share the link with everybody. And thanks Clifford for the amazing talk.
Thank you. See you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Thanks for organizing this.
Thank you.